At the graveside, my daughter read a forged will, declaring our $3 million company and home now belonged to her husband. I sat frozen, humiliated in front of everyone. Later, when I touched my late wife's Bible, a folded note slipped out. The words inside flipped my world upside down. That note wasn't just paper, it was a weapon, a truth that would burn their empire to ashes. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone that evening, the silence of the house pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. My daughter and her husband had just made it clear. The home I built, the money I worked for, the sacrifices I made, all of it was theirs for the taking. Their words still echoed in my head. I kept hearing the sound of my son-in-law's voice when he said, "It's not your place anymore, old man." My daughter didn't stop him. She didn't even flinch. And in that moment, the years I had poured into their lives came flooding back, each memory sharper and heavier than the last. I thought back to the long nights I worked double shifts at the plant. I can still smell the oil on my hands, the steel dust clinging to my clothes, the ache in my back that never quite went away. I remember the week my daughter got into college. Tuition was $25,000 for that first year alone. I didn't have the savings, but I couldn't let her down. I picked up night shifts, sometimes working until 3 in the morning, then dragging myself back to the plant by 7. I told myself it was worth it because I could see the pride in her eyes when she talked about moving into the dorms. Then came the car. My son-in-law was unemployed at the time, and I thought maybe helping him would give him a chance to stand on his own 2 feet. $15,000. That's what I spent on a car for him, a car I never even drove once. And the wedding, God, the wedding. $50,000 gone in a single day for a ceremony my wife and I believed would cement our family together. I even skipped my dream of opening a small garage, a dream I had nursed for years, just so every penny could go to them. I gave up weekends with friends, vacations I had promised my wife. There were summers when I ate beans and rice 5 nights a week, telling myself I was saving for their future. And now, what do I have? Nothing but betrayal. Nothing but words, sharp enough to bleed me dry. The walls of this house hold every echo of our lives, every sacrifice, every small joy. This house, valued at nearly $2.8 million today, is more than brick and wood to me. It is where my wife sat by the window sewing curtains by hand, humming hymns under her breath. It is where my daughter blew out birthday candles, where she learned to ride her first bike in the driveway. Every inch of this place carries fingerprints of a life we built with sweat and love. Yet when I looked at it now, I didn't see warmth. I saw their greedy hands reaching for it, tearing memories into pieces as if they were nothing more than numbers on a bank statement. I stared at the family photos on the mantel, my wife in her wedding dress, smiling like she believed our world would always be safe. My daughter in pigtails, holding the dog we rescued. Those images used to bring me comfort. Now they felt like knives. The photograph of our wedding was no longer a reminder of love. It was a reminder of how money had corrupted everything. The living room, once full of laughter and birthday songs, now hummed with silence. A silence thick with betrayal. It was during one of those nights of restless wandering that I opened the closet where my wife kept her old things. I found a wooden box tucked behind folded quilts. The cedar was scratched and worn, but the lock had long been broken. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid, expecting maybe letters or trinkets. What I found instead made my breath catch. Inside were papers, neatly stacked. Some yellowed with age, some folded as if hidden in haste. There was a letter addressed to me, written in my wife's delicate script. Alongside it were bank records, casino receipts, and documents I never knew existed. I sat down hard, the weight of it pressing me into the floor. The truth spilled from those pages like poison. My son-in-law was drowning in debt, $200,000 in gambling losses, money borrowed from people no honest man should ever be near. And my wife, God bless her, had known. She had kept the records, saved the proof, and written in her letter that if anything happened to her, I must use these papers to protect what we built. Her words blurred as I read them through tears. Don't let them destroy what we gave our lives for. Protect our home. Protect our name. It felt like a second death, a wound reopened. She had carried this knowledge alone, shielding me. The woman I thought I knew entirely had fought a quiet battle beside me. And now, from beyond the grave, she had placed the weapon in my hands. The shock was almost too much to bear. I remember staring at those papers for hours, the room spinning. My daughter's betrayal had already crushed me, but this truth, it was heavier than steel. It wasn't just greed driving them. It was desperation, lies, and a hunger that would never be satisfied. For a moment, I hated myself for not seeing it sooner. How blind had I been? How foolish to think money could buy loyalty, that sacrifice could buy love. I whispered into the silence, speaking to my wife though she was gone. I should have protected us better. I should have seen what he was. My chest ached as if she might answer me, and maybe she did in some way, because as I sat there, a shift stirred inside me. Her letter wasn't just a warning. It was a call, a plea for me to stand. I felt my blood heat, the weakness in my hands fading as I gripped those documents. For weeks I had been shaking, my voice broken, my body bent under grief. But now, something steadier rose in me. I could almost hear her voice. Don't let them win. It was no longer about just protecting my money or my house. It was about honoring the woman who stood by me all those years, the life we carved out of nothing, the name I wanted my grandchildren to be proud of. My daughter had chosen greed. My son-in-law had chosen lies, but I would choose strength. And this time I would not back down. The next morning I stared at my phone as message after message popped up from my daughter. Demands, excuses, pleas disguised as orders. I didn't reply. For the first time in months, I hit delete. Then I powered the phone off and set it face down. My hand didn't shake. My breathing didn't stutter. I looked in the mirror and said to myself, "No more. I don't answer them anymore." The words came out steady, the voice of a man I thought I had lost. I could feel the old strength in my shoulders, the resolve building in my chest. I would not be their pawn. I would not let grief make me their victim. They thought I was broken. They thought I was weak. They were wrong. I sat in the living room, the same room where birthdays once lit up the air, now draped in shadows. The recliner beside me was still indented from where my wife used to sit, her perfume faintly lingering in the fabric. The clock on the wall ticked, each second loud, relentless. It no longer sounded like comfort. It sounded like a countdown. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier, but within that suffocating space I made my choice. I spread the documents across the coffee table, laid my wife's letter beside them, and whispered to the empty chair, "I will protect this for us." The house that had become my prison was now my fortress. The silence that had suffocated me now became my shield. In that quiet, I found my power. When I rose from that chair, I wasn't the same man who had sat down in despair. I was the man who had worked 50 years with steel and fire, the man who had survived loss before, the man who would not let his family name be dragged into the dirt. I knew where I would go. I knew who I would call. And I knew that the game had just begun. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment one below to let me know you're here with me. The morning after I found my wife's letter, I woke with a clarity I had not felt in months. For weeks I had lived like a man trapped under rubble, gasping for air, buried beneath betrayal and grief. But when the sun crept through the blinds that day, I rose with steady hands. The papers she had hidden, the proof of my son-in-law's gambling debts, the quiet plea in her handwriting, they had become the steel frame holding me up. I was no longer a man simply enduring heartbreak. I was a man with a weapon, and I knew it was time to act. I called James, the lawyer who had handled my wife's will years ago. His voice, calm and deliberate, had always carried the weight of reason. "James," I said, steadying my tone, "I need to freeze every account tied to my name. Savings, retirement, everything. My daughter and her husband are circling like vultures, and I have proof of their fraud. I want the papers ready before they make their next move." There was a pause. Then James answered, "I had a feeling you'd be calling. Your wife. She trusted me with some documents before she passed. She told me you might need them." His words stopped me for a moment, the air thick in my throat. Even in her final months she had been planning, protecting. My heart ached, but it also burned with resolve. I told him to prepare everything, and by noon I was in his office. signing papers that would lock down more than $400,000 of my savings and the deed to the house. My hand did not shake once. The pen glided firmly across each page. I looked at my signature, bold and unwavering, and I thought, this is what control feels like. When I left James's office, I went directly to the bank. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and old carpet, the same bank where I had deposited paychecks for over 30 years. Sarah, a teller who had known my wife well, looked up and gave me a smile tinged with pity. "Mr. Harris," she said softly, "are you all right? I've noticed some unusual withdrawals from your accounts these past few months. I was worried." Her words hit me like a breath of clean air in a coal mine. Someone still saw me. Someone noticed what my own blood had ignored. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Sarah, they've been stealing from me, my daughter and her husband. But I've taken steps. Thank you for noticing. It means more than you know." She touched my hand across the counter, just briefly, and whispered, "I believe you." That small kindness, from a near stranger, cut deeper than all the empty words from my own family. It reminded me how cruel indifference feels when it comes from those who should love you most. I walked out of the bank with my accounts frozen, my head held high. My daughter and her husband would find a wall the next time they tried to reach into my life. And that thought alone steadied me. That evening they came to the house. They didn't knock timidly. They entered as if the place was already theirs. My son-in-law strutted through the living room with a folder under his arm, his arrogance dripping like oil on water. "Dad," he said, with a smirk he didn't bother to hide, "I've been working on some numbers. We'll be investing part of the estate into a real estate project. High returns, low risk. You don't need to worry about the details." He spread the papers across my coffee table, lines of figures and glossy charts that meant nothing to me but looked impressive enough to fool a bystander. My daughter sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his, her eyes trained on me, as if daring me to resist. I did not speak. I simply nodded, letting them talk, letting them boast. He rambled on about profit margins, about expanding assets, about how soon I'd have no responsibility at all. His words were meant to comfort, but they were daggers dressed as silk. I sat in silence, my eyes steady, my lips pressed tight. I thought of my wife's letter in the wooden box upstairs. I thought of the receipts showing his gambling debts, the record of his lies. I thought of the bank accounts now locked down beyond their reach. They had no idea. They believed they were winning. That belief was my shield. I let them dig deeper into their pit, smiling faintly as if I were the old man they thought I was, clueless and broken. Later that night, as I walked past their voices echoing down the hall, I froze. My son-in-law was on the phone, his voice low and sharp. I pressed my ear to the doorframe, my heart hammering in my chest. "Don't worry," he whispered. "The old man's useless. No one will believe a word he says if he tries to fight back. By the time he realizes, the house will be ours." My blood boiled. I wanted to storm in, to rip the phone from his hand, to scream, but I clenched my fists and forced myself to stay still. They weren't just after my money. They wanted to paint me as a senile fool, a man unfit to manage his own affairs. They wanted to erase me entirely. I stepped back from the door, rage clawing at my throat. But beneath the fury was something colder, harder. They thought they could make me look crazy. They thought my grief had stripped me of reason. They didn't know that I had already armed myself with proof, with allies, with time. Their words were not knives anymore. They were confessions. And I would use them. The next morning I met James again. He slid a manila folder across his desk, his eyes serious. "Your instincts were right," he said. "I ran a background search. Your son-in-law has more than just gambling debts. He has outstanding liens, 2 pending cases for fraud, and a record of filing false tax returns. All public record." He opened the folder, revealing printouts, official seals, and documents stamped with dates and signatures. My stomach turned, but not from fear, from victory. This was the weapon my wife must have prayed I would find. Proof undeniable, a history of lies as wide as a canyon. I leaned back in the chair, a grim smile tugging at my lips. They think I've lost. But James, this game is just beginning. That afternoon I returned home, the folder tucked under my arm like a shield. My daughter and her husband were waiting, their eyes alight with confidence. They began again speaking of transfers, of signatures, of future plans that never once included me. My daughter pulled out a letter, one I had written years ago, when times were tight and I had promised to leave her something. She waved it in front of me as if it were a weapon. "You said this house would always be mine one day," she said. Her words stung for a moment, pulling at old wounds, but I saw the desperation behind her eyes. They had to dig into the past, to twist my words, to justify their greed. I looked at her calmly and said, "And I meant it when love still lived here, but promises built on lies don't stand." She faltered, her eyes darting away. My silence, my steadiness, unnerved hair. As they pushed harder, demanding signatures, pressing me to act, I leaned back and simply observed. Each boast, each cruel remark, each threat, they all piled higher, evidence stacking itself in front of me. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to shout. My strength was in restraint. And in that restraint I saw them clearly for what they were. Desperate thieves cloaked in family titles. By the time they stormed out, frustrated with my refusal to sign, I felt lighter. I had seen their cards, all of them. I had their lies recorded in my memory, their arrogance laid bare. And in my pocket, I carried their downfall. That night, I spread the documents across my kitchen table. My wife's letter, the gambling receipts, and the fraud records James had found. I placed them in a single envelope, sealed it tight, and whispered into the quiet, "They don't know what's coming." My hand rested on the envelope, my heart steady. For the first time since the betrayal began, I felt not just hope, but certainty. I leaned back, the ticking clock echoing through the house, and smiled. They thought they had broken me. They thought the game was over. But they were wrong. The game had only just begun. And to those of you listening, if you've ever seen greed turn family into strangers, if you've ever been treated as if your years of sacrifice meant nothing, I want you to comment one word: awake. Because that's what I am now, awake. And soon they will be too. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke early on the day of the family meeting and walked through the house like a watchman checking doors at dawn. The oak floors had a soft creak I'd learned to avoid. The living room window threw a long bar of light across the rug my wife picked out on a spring day, when we still argued about color but never about love. I arranged chairs in a circle, not face to face like a fight, but open, so no one could say I forced a corner. On the mantel, our wedding photo stood between the urn of lilies and a small frame of my daughter Emily at 10, freckles on her nose and frosting on her cheeks. I touched the frame and set it back. The recliner beside mine still carried the faint scent of my wife's perfume. For a moment I sat there and let the silence breathe with me. Then I rose, put the envelope from James in the center of the coffee table, and waited for the knock. They arrived like a wind that doesn't ask permission. Emily's lips pressed into a line I used to see when she was caught in a lie as a teenager. Behind her came Jason, my son-in-law, with a briefcase and the slick confidence of a man who thinks numbers make him bulletproof. 2 of Emily's cousins trailed in, along with Jason's sister and a neighbor from their side who barely nodded at me. They filled the room with perfume and cologne and the rustle of papers. Jason didn't bother with small talk. He set his briefcase on the table and clicked it open as if he were opening a door to a future he already owned. "We'll keep this simple," he said. "We've prepared a transfer of title for the house, and a durable power of attorney so we can manage everything smoothly. It's best for you, Dad. Less stress, no confusion." Emily sat straight back beside him. "Daddy, it's time," she said, using a word she hadn't used in years, an old key to a door she thought still fit. "We want to take care of you." Around the circle, heads bobbed. Someone murmured that this was sensible. Someone else said every family gets to this stage. I looked at the stack of papers Jason fanned on the table. Tabs, highlights, and signatures flagged with fluorescent arrows. He'd done his homework. He assumed I hadn't done mine. I took a breath and kept my voice even. "Before we sign anything, we're going to talk. Everyone will have a chance to speak. And there will be witnesses." I nodded toward the hallway. James stepped out, suit pressed, eyes steady, the manila folder tucked under his arm like a carpenter's level. Behind him came Mrs. Alvarez from next door, carrying a plate of oatmeal cookies, because that's what she does when storms gather. Mr. Donovan, who fought in Vietnam with me and never forgot how to tell a hard truth without shouting, followed and took a chair by the bookshelf. Sarah from the bank slipped in quietly, hands folded, eyes gentle. The room shifted. The air changed. Jason blinked as if he'd miscounted. "This is a family matter," he said, frowning. "So is the truth," I answered. "Sit." James laid a single sheet on the table. "For the record," he said, "my client invited witnesses to attest to his capacity today. I also have a signed letter from his physician stating he is of sound mind and understands the nature and consequences of financial decisions." He set the letter by Jason's bright tabs. "We will proceed calmly." Jason shrugged and smiled thinly, the way a card player smiles when he wants you to think your hand is weak. "That's fine," he said. "It's still in everyone's best interest to finalize this. The market's shifting. We should liquidate quickly. The house is valued at around $2.8 million. A cash out now would secure long-term care and avoid headaches." There it was, the number he could not resist tasting as he spoke. 2.8 million. To him, it was oxygen. To me, it was brick and sweat and the handprints of a life. I nodded at the papers and said nothing. He mistook my quiet for surrender and kept talking. "We've also consolidated plans for the savings accounts. I've mapped out how to reinvest the $400,000 in a balanced portfolio. You won't have to worry about bills or repairs. Emily and I will manage everything. We'll get you a nice place, less upkeep, maybe a facility where—" He stopped, searching for a word that didn't sound like prison. "Where support is available," he finished, smoothing a palm over a spreadsheet. Emily reached for my hand. I let her touch it and did not close my fingers. Her voice trembled at the edges. "Daddy, please, this is for your own good." Mrs. Alvarez leaned forward. "I see him every day," she said, voice soft but firm. "He walks, he drives, he cooks. He reads the paper and discusses articles better than I do. He's not confused." Mr. Donovan cleared his throat. "I served with him," he said. "He forgets nothing that matters. He calls me before I call him. He's the one who noticed my truck was leaking transmission fluid, not the other way around. He's fine." Sarah's voice came last, gentle as a hand on a child's shoulder. "I've known his accounts for years. He asks precise questions. He caught a bank fee last month faster than I did. And he came in on his own to address suspicious withdrawals before anyone could guide him. He is lucid. He is careful." The room didn't like those words. They punctured Jason's script. He lifted his chin. "No one is saying he's incompetent," he said, smiling toward the circle. "We're just trying to streamline. Families should support each other." James placed 3 small documents on the table, each sealed in a clear sleeve. "Then we should begin with facts," he said. "First, a letter notifying all parties that the savings accounts have been legally frozen pending further review. The bank acknowledged the freeze on a balance totaling $412,617. Second, a notice of revocation of any previously executed informal powers of attorney not filed with the court. Third, a preemptive petition for a protective order against financial exploitation." He tapped each document. Their edges made a crisp sound against wood. The cousins stopped shifting. Jason's smile flickered. Emily turned toward me, eyes filling with practiced tears. She raised her voice without warning, as if a switch had been flipped. "Daddy, you don't know what you're doing," she cried. "You don't understand any of this. You're being manipulated. You're not well. You keep losing your keys. You forget appointments. You called me by Mom's name last week. Please, stop before you embarrass yourself." The blow landed right where she meant it to. It struck at the softest part. The room swam for a second, my wife's name floating in the air like a bell that hadn't been rung. The humiliation burned hot in my throat. To be called confused in my own living room, by my own child. To be told grief was a disease that erased my right to guard what I built. I steadied myself on the arm of the chair, and let the anger pass through without setting anything on fire. Then I exhaled and raised a finger to James. "Small truths first," I said. He handed me a plain folder. I opened it and took out an old receipt. "Tuition," I said, and laid it on the table. "First year, $25,000. Paid from a second job that I worked without telling you because I didn't want to make you feel guilty. I'm not asking for the money back. I'm asking for the truth. Who paid it? Emily stared at the receipt as if it were a spider she didn't dare touch. She said nothing. I slid another paper forward. The car I bought Jason when he couldn't find work. 15,000. I drove my old truck another 3 years so you could have that sedan. Who paid it? Jason laughed, too loudly, and shook his head. Those are ancient history, he said. Gifts. You can't bring up gifts now to muddy the water. We're here to handle the present. The present, I repeated, and set down a printout from the bank. Like these withdrawals in odd sums, 2,000 here, 3,800 there, made without my authorization from a device that doesn't belong to me. The bank flagged them. Sarah flagged them. I asked for help. Who made them? Jason looked at Sarah with a feigned astonishment that fooled no one. Is this really the time to question routine transactions? He said. We agreed. We didn't agree to theft, I said. My voice was quiet. It carried anyway. He leaned back and crossed his legs, the way a man leans when he wants to show you the soles of his shoes. Fine, he said. You don't want to sign today. That's your right. But sooner or later this is going to happen. You can't manage a property valued at almost $3 million alone, and you don't have the stomach for court. Save yourself the headache. Emily wiped her eyes and turned toward the circle. You see, she said, he's being combative. This isn't who he is. He's not thinking clearly. Mrs. Alvarez spoke again before James could. What you're doing isn't caring, she said. It's pressure. Enough, Jason snapped. We brought family to help him. You brought outsiders to embarrass us. Oh. I tapped the phone on the table and swiped to a recording. My thumb hovered for a second. Jason watched, curiosity mixing with confidence. He had no idea what was coming. I breathed once and pressed play. His voice filled the room, low and contemptuous, captured 2 nights earlier when he stood just outside my door. Don't worry, the old man's useless. No one will believe a word he says. By the time he realizes, the house will be ours. No one moved. The cousin who had been tapping her foot stopped. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to hush. The words hung there, ugly and undeniable. Emily's face went pale. She turned to him. You said... He stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. That's taken out of context, he said, palms out, as if he could push the sound back into my phone. You recorded me? In your own house? That's illegal. James shook his head once. It isn't. Jason's mouth worked, but no words came. He looked at Emily. We talked about this. I told you I was keeping us safe. I had to say things to get the plan through. It was just talk. Just talk, I said, and slid the next set of papers across the table. Public records, Jason. Liens. 2 pending fraud cases. A history of false returns. Your past is not just talk. It's an atlas. He swore under his breath. The room heard it. He grabbed for the documents, but James's hand was there first, steady as a stone. Don't touch the exhibits, James said. Emily's voice rose again, but the tears now were different. Not performed. Not yet remorse. Panic. You told me everything was fine, she said. You said the debts were gone. You said Dad agreed. You said there were no liabilities left. You said... I said I had it handled, he snapped, turning on her. If your father weren't so stubborn, we wouldn't be in this mess. He should have signed weeks ago. He's dragging us down. He's always... I raised a hand. Don't finish that sentence. Ove. Silence held for a beat that felt like a rope pulled tight. Then I reached for the envelope I'd placed on the coffee table before they arrived. It was heavier than it looked, not because of the paper, but because of what it meant. I slid it to the center and opened it slowly. The letterhead at the top had my wife's name. Her script ran along the lines like a song written in a key only she could play. This, I said, and my voice surprised me with its softness, is your mother's last message to me about the house. She wrote it when she realized how far things had gone. She didn't tell me then because she knew I'd confront you and it would get ugly. She wanted a clean line. She wanted the truth to stand before anger could knock it down. I passed the first page to James, who read a paragraph aloud, careful, measured, every word like a nail struck square. I, Margaret Harris, hereby amend our revocable living trust to restate that the family home is placed in the Harris Family Trust, with my husband Richard as sole trustee during his lifetime. Upon his death, the property shall pass not to Emily Carter and her spouse Jason Carter, but to our grandson Benjamin Harris, to be held in a spendthrift trust until he reaches the age of 30, with James Porter, Esquire, as independent trustee. Any beneficiary who contests this trust shall forfeit their share under the no contest clause. This amendment supersedes all prior informal promises or letters. Emily stared at me as if the floor had tilted. "Ben," she said, barely above a whisper, "you put it in Ben's name?" "Your mother did," I answered, "because he showed up when you didn't. He mowed the lawn with me last summer. He drove your mother to her appointments. He sat in this chair and listened to her stories. He never asked for a thing. Not once. He's 15 and somehow he knew how to be family when the people who taught him forgot." Jason laughed then, short and sharp, the laugh of a man who thinks he can talk his way through a locked door. "You can't do that," he said. "A surprise trust, a no contest clause. You'll get torn apart in probate. You don't have the nerve for court. You don't have the money. This is nonsense. Judges don't care about your sentimental garbage." James placed a second document on the table. The trust was executed properly, notarized, filed. The deed has already been transferred into the trust's name. As of 2 weeks ago, this property is no longer in Mr. Harris's personal estate. It is controlled by the trust. The amendment is valid. Any challenge will trigger the no contest clause, which will remove any beneficial interest Emily might otherwise have had. Mr. Harris retains the right to live here for life. No one can force a sale. Oh. The color drained from Jason's face. He grabbed his phone like a drowning man grabs a rope. "I'll call my attorney," he said, pacing. "I'll call him right now. He'll stop this. He'll stop everything." "Call him," I said, and folded my hands. "Call everyone you want. Call the cousins. Call the neighbors you brought to shame me. Call the sky if it makes you feel better. But the deed knows only one language, and it doesn't speak panic." Emily's breath hitched. She looked small in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child, afraid of thunder. "You promised," she said, the words falling out like beads from a broken string. "You promised, Dad. You said one day the house would be mine." "I promised when love lived here," I said quietly. "When respect lived here. But promises built on lies don't stand. Your mother knew. She left me the map. I just had to follow it." Jason's voice rose in a pitch that didn't suit him. "This is manipulation," he said, pointing at James. "Lawyers twisting a grieving man's mind. You can't do this to us." Sarah stood then, hands clasped, voice steady. "No," she said. "You did this to yourselves." He spun toward her. "You're a teller," he sneered. "You stamp deposit slips. Stay in your lane." She held his gaze without blinking. "My lane is seeing people," she said, "and I see exactly what this is." The last of his performance drained away. He swore again, louder, and Emily flinched. He turned on her. "You told me your father was weak," he hissed. "You told me he'd sign anything. You said the paperwork was a formality. You said—" "I said what you wanted to hear," she shot back, voice cracking. "You told me the debts were gone. You told me the fraud cases would disappear. You told me Dad had given you permission. You told me everything was fine. You told me—" "Enough," I said. Not because I wanted to protect him from the truth, but because I didn't need the fight to finish to know who had already lost. James cleared his throat. He slid one last paper into the light. "There is also a recorded authorization for me, as trustee, to initiate civil action in the event of further harassment, unauthorized entries, or attempts to coerce Mr. Harris. Additionally, a temporary restraining order has been pre-approved and will be filed immediately if necessary. Copies have been prepared for service." Jason laughed again, but it sounded more like a cough. "You're going to serve me in my own family meeting?" he asked. "I'm going to protect my home in my own living room," I said, "and I'm going to do it without raising my voice." He shoved his papers into the briefcase with hands that moved too fast to look calm. He snapped the lid shut as if the click could close the door back to the future he had imagined. Emily rose slowly, eyes glassy, cheeks streaked. No one else moved. Even the cousins had the decency to stare at the rug. Mrs. Alvarez lifted the plate of cookies and whispered something about leaving them anyway, because sugar helps the heart remember it is still beating. Before they reached the door, I said the one thing I had saved for last, not because it was the loudest, but because it cut the deepest without drawing blood. You told people I was losing my mind, I said to Emily. You told them I was confused. The next time you think about the word confusion, I want you to remember this room. Remember the papers. Remember your mother's handwriting. Remember the truth sitting in front of you like a mirror. I am not confused. I am clear. I am as clear as I have ever been. She paused, head bowed. For a heartbeat, I saw my little girl again, the one who asked me to check under the bed for monsters. I could have reached out. I could have said her name the way I did when she was small and scared. But some lessons can't be handed like tissues. They have to be learned in the cold air of consequences. Jason yanked the door open and walked out into the hallway, phone already to his ear, voice sharp, words clipped. Emily followed, slower, one hand on the frame as if it could steady what the floor had become. The cousins filed after them. The house exhaled when the door shut. I didn't cheer. I didn't sigh with triumph. I sat down in my chair and let my hands rest palm up on my knees, as if I were catching rain. James gathered the documents carefully. Mr. Donovan clapped my shoulder once, the way soldiers say more than words can carry. Sarah put a hand to her heart and nodded, proud and sad all at once. Mrs. Alvarez set the plate of cookies on the table and said they taste best with milk, and I laughed, not from joy exactly, but from a relief so deep it felt like sleep after a long night. The living room looked different. The light had shifted across the rug. Dust floated in the bar of sun like little planets going about their business. The clock ticked. It no longer sounded like a countdown. It sounded like time. James leaned forward. There will be fallout, he said. Expect calls. Expect threats. Expect pleas. We'll handle it. The trust stands, the deed stands, the freeze stands. If they file, we respond. If they push, we press. You've done what you had to do. I know, I said. I did it for her. I looked at the empty recliner. And for me, I added, surprised by how right that felt on my tongue. For me, too. He slid a smaller envelope into my hand. This is for you, he said. Your wife wrote something else. Not legal, personal. I didn't open it then. Some things are best read when the room is empty and the heart is quiet. I slipped it into my shirt pocket and patted it once, like a locket, like a secret that doesn't hide but anchors. They left one by one, after promises to check on me later, after offers of dinner and rides and anything I might need. I stood at the window and watched Mr. Donovan's pickup pull away, then Sarah's sedan, then James's dark car that carried the gravity of law. The house settled around me, not heavy now, but sure. I walked the circle of chairs and put them back where they belonged. I lifted the family photos and dusted the edges with the hem of my sleeve. I straightened the frame of our wedding picture, and when I did, my reflection lined up with my younger self for a second, old eyes and young shoulders, the same man. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Emily. 3 lines, no punctuation, like the breath had been knocked out of the words. We need to talk. This isn't fair. You promised. I put the phone face down. The world didn't end. The ceiling didn't fall. The quiet stayed. I poured a glass of milk and took one of Mrs. Alvarez's cookies. It tasted like childhood. It tasted like a house where you could leave the door unlocked. I ate it slowly, let the crumbs cling to my fingertips, and wiped them on a napkin the way my wife used to shake her head at me. Some habits I will keep. When the sun moved lower and the room turned the color of late afternoon, I took the smaller envelope from my pocket and opened it with a butter knife. The letter inside was short, my wife's most careful script. If you are reading this, it means you did the hard thing. I know you think you're not a fighter. You are. You always have been, just not for yourself. This time you fought for us. This time you fought for yourself. Keep the house as long as it feels like home. When it doesn't, let it go without guilt. Love is not held by wood. It is held by memory. Give our grandson the chance to learn what you taught me, that the truth is a shelter. And if the truth makes people angry, let them be angry somewhere else. I am proud of you. I am with you, always. I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest. The ache that had lived there for months changed shape. It didn't disappear. Grief never does. But it stopped crushing. It became something I could carry. Night came on softly, the way summer nights do when the air is kind. I turned on the porch light and stepped outside. The yard smelled like cut grass and the neighbor's grill. Somewhere, a kid laughed. Somewhere, a dog barked. I sat on the top step and closed my eyes. The door behind me was locked, not because I was afraid, but because I had nothing left inside that belonged to anyone who would take it. Tomorrow there will be more to do. Calls to return or ignore, papers to file or sign. I will meet Ben after school and explain what trust means in words a 15-year-old can understand. I will tell him that responsibility is heavier than desire, and that's why it makes a man. I will go to the bank and thank Sarah again. I will bring Mrs. Alvarez a pie. I will ask Mr. Donovan to help me change the oil because the truck deserves attention too. And if Jason calls with threats, I will send him to James. If Emily calls with tears, I will listen, but I will not bargain. Boundaries are not cruel. They are doors that you can knock on when you are ready to come in with clean hands. They thought I was weak. They thought grief had turned me soft. They thought the word father meant fool. Now they know what it really means. It means the one who built the table also decides who sits at it. It means the one who paid tuition and bought cars and skipped vacations can also say, enough. It means the one you tried to push aside still stands in the doorway, not to keep you out forever, but to keep the wolves from carrying the house away. I will sleep tonight. The clock will tick. It will sound like time again. And in the morning, the plan that began in secret letters and careful signatures will carry me into a life that belongs to me. There will be consequences for them. There always are. But that story can wait a chapter. For now, the living room is mine. The quiet is mine. The truth is mine. If you've ever been treated like you were invisible, if you've ever been told you were confused when you were only grieving, if your sacrifices were turned into a weapon against you, I know how that feels. It hurts. It can make you doubt your own name. But listen to me, truth is patient, and when it stands up, it doesn't have to shout. Feeling dismissed and used is heavy, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves respect and recognition, comment, respect. Now watch what they do to change that, and see how a quiet truth can move a mountain. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment below to let me know you're here with me. I signed the last document with a hand that no longer trembled. The house where I had raised Emily, where I had built every corner with sweat and patience, now belonged to the trust. From there, the plan was simple. James found a buyer quickly, and within weeks the sale was done. $700,000 sat safely under my name, out of reach from anyone who thought they could force my hand. The old house stood proud as I closed the door one final time, but I didn't leave in sorrow. I left in relief. For too long its walls had echoed with betrayal. Now it would shelter someone else's laughter. I stepped into a smaller place, a single-story home with pale blue siding and a porch that looked out over a quiet park. The price was just under $200,000. Modest, manageable, mine. The move itself was humbling. Boxes of tools, albums, old coats that smelled faintly of campfires. I kept what mattered, let go of what didn't. On the first night, I set up a chair on the porch and watched the park turn gold at sunset. The air felt different here, light. I could breathe without waiting for the next argument. That night, I slept without waking. For the first time in years, the silence in my room was not an enemy. It was peace. As for Jason, word spread quickly. His debts surfaced in court records. His so-called business partners dropped him faster than stones sink. Friend, she bragged, now avoided his calls. He went from the man who strutted in my living room to a man renting a shabby apartment above a pawn shop. I heard he was begging for contracts that never came. He lost the shine he lived on. As for Emily, her face disappeared from church gatherings and community events. People whispered, and not kindly. She carried her shame quietly, shoulders bent. Neighbors told me she still lived with Jason, but she no longer held her head high. It was a punishment worse than any I could have given. Then came the letter, folded, handwritten, left in my mailbox one rainy morning. I opened it at the kitchen table while the coffee steamed. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't know how far it would go. Jason said it was the only way. I see now it was wrong. Please forgive me. The words blurred as I read them, not from tears, but from the emptiness of too little, too late. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with old bills. I did not write back. Forgiveness is not something begged in ink. It is chosen. And I chose to forgive her silently, not for her sake, but for mine. I would not let her chains rattle in my chest anymore. I whispered to myself, I don't need their apology. I have my life. Day by day, I stitched my life back together. I returned to my garage. The smell of oil and metal greeted me like old friends. I spent hours fixing the engine of my truck, hands steady, mind clear. Out back, I planted roses, the kind Margaret loved. The first buds opened like small victories. I joined the Veterans Club again, shaking hands with men who remembered me for who I truly was, not who someone tried to paint me as. We swapped stories, laughed at old jokes, and played cards on Thursday nights. For the first time in a long time, I felt surrounded by loyalty. But peace is not only about reclaiming what you lost. It is about giving. One morning I walked into the local community center with a check for $50,000. For scholarships, I told the director, so kids don't have to bend to greed just to get an education. Her eyes filled, and she hugged me before I could object. That hug carried more weight than all of Jason's fake promises. In giving away a portion of what I fought to protect, I discovered a freedom that money alone can't buy. The days took on a rhythm. Coffee on the porch at dawn, a walk in the park where I nodded to neighbors. An old man with a cane tipped his hat. A boy on a bicycle waved as if I were family. Small gestures, but enough to remind me that goodness still exists. One afternoon, as I knelt by the roses, a little girl from next door toddled over and handed me a yellow dandelion. "For you," she said. I laughed, my voice shaking with gratitude. That small flower felt heavier with meaning than the house I had left behind. The world, I realized, still held kindness if you knew where to look. Of course, echoes of the past lingered. Occasionally, Emily called. I let it ring. Once, Jason himself sent a message, short and desperate. "We can work this out." I deleted it without a second thought. I wasn't cruel. I was clear. Some doors, once closed, must stay closed. Boundaries are not walls to trap others. They are gates to protect yourself. On quiet evenings, I found myself reflecting on what this whole ordeal had taught me. For parents like me, the lesson is simple but hard. Love must have boundaries. Sacrifice without limits breeds entitlement, not gratitude. For children, the truth is sharper. Greed and disrespect destroy families faster than any outside enemy ever could. And for all of us in this noisy, restless world, the core of our worth is not money, it is character. Houses fall, accounts drain, but integrity endures. I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sky burn orange before fading to violet. A neighbor, an older man with a limp, passed by and raised his hand. "You held your ground," he said. His smile was warm, without pity. I nodded back. "I don't need them anymore," I said softly to myself. "I have me." The words rolled steadily, solid. They felt like truth nailed into wood. The journey ended not in bitterness, but in freedom. I was no longer a man chained by betrayal. I was a man who chose himself, who chose peace, who chose to believe that kindness is still out there. And every rose blooming in my yard, every child's laugh in the park, every handshake at the Veterans Hall reminded me, I made the right choice. Life will continue. There will be more mornings, more sunsets, more neighbors to wave at. Perhaps even new beginnings I cannot see yet. What matters is this: I am free, and I am whole. If you're listening to my story, let me ask you, what lesson stands out the most to you? Comment on the one that speaks loudest to your heart, so we can all carry it forward into our own lives. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.